My daughter handed me her phone, her hands shaking, as she said someone knew everything about her. Someone had been tracking my kids' every step, every text, every private moment. I never imagined that person would be someone sitting at our dinner table every holiday. This story starts with a Christmas gift my parents gave my daughter. A brand new phone, the kind I couldn't afford to buy her, no matter how many extra shifts I worked. Back then, I was just grateful she could have what all her friends had. I had no idea that gift would turn into a nightmare. To protect my daughter, I lost almost everything, had to sell my old car, burned through all my savings. Even my relationship with my own family fell apart. But if I had to choose again, I'd do the same thing. Follow my story to understand why sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the person your whole family trusts the most. Before we begin, I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my story today. Hello everyone, I'm Garrett Webb, 42 years old. The story I'm telling today starts last Christmas, when my daughter got a gift from her grandparents. I work as a delivery driver for UPS at the distribution center in Bellevue, Washington. My shift runs from 6 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, which means I get up when it's still dark and come home while the sun's still up. It's nothing to brag about, but at least it lets me pick up Maisie after school without paying extra for childcare. 3 years ago, my wife Brooke decided that life with a delivery driver wasn't exciting enough. She had an affair and moved to California with another guy, leaving me with a daughter and a pile of bills. Sometimes she sends Maisie birthday cards, probably to ease her guilt. I don't hold grudges. Some people are born to be parents and some aren't. Brooke was the second type. Since the divorce, I've been raising Maisie alone. She was 14 then. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Crossroads area of Bellevue, a place they call affordable housing to be polite, but really it's just the cheapest of the bad options. Rent takes almost half my paycheck, plus the cost of the type 2 diabetes medication I take daily, so by the end of every month, my bank account's skinnier than it was in college. My family consists of my parents, Howard and Donna Webb, both of whom are retired and reside in the Seattle suburbs. My sister, Jenna, is 4 years younger and is married to Preston Cole, a successful real estate broker in Kirkland. Preston's the kind of guy who walks into a room and the air itself seems to bow down to him. He has a mansion overlooking Lake Washington, a brand new Mercedes, and a smile so white it looks like it came straight from a toothpaste commercial. And me? I drive a delivery truck, wear a brown uniform, and pray my 2009 Honda Civic doesn't break down on I-405. In my parents' eyes, I'm living proof of failure. At every family gathering, Preston talks about his million-dollar deals, and everyone nods as if they're hearing the gospel. I sit in the corner of the table, occasionally getting asked some polite question like work still going okay? And that's it. That question doesn't need an answer because nobody really wants to hear it. But I have Maisie. She's everything to me, and that was enough, at least I thought so. Last Christmas, I had no idea that what seemed like a normal gift would change our lives forever. I showed up late on Christmas Eve, still wearing my brown UPS uniform, because I had gotten off work late and didn't have time to go home and change. The Christmas season is particularly challenging for delivery drivers. Everyone wants their gifts to arrive before the holiday, and I'm the one racing against the clock. When I walked into my parents' house on Lakemont Boulevard, the smell of cookies and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. The fireplace was crackling, and a nearly 6-foot Christmas tree sparkled with colored lights. It looked beautiful like a Hallmark card, except I looked more like a delivery guy who'd wandered into an upscale party than a family member. Everyone was sitting around Preston. He was leaning back in his leather armchair, holding a glass of red wine, gesturing as he told the whole family. That mansion was worth $3 million. My commission was enough to buy a new Mercedes. Dad clapped his thigh in approval. Mom smiled with pride. Jenna sat next to her husband, her eyes bright, as if she were hearing a historical speech. Their 2 boys, Brody and Owen, were playing on their phones in the corner. I quietly sat down on the edge of the sofa. Right then, Maisie ran over and hugged me tight, whispering, "You work too hard." Dad turned toward me, his eyes scanning my wrinkled uniform, then asked, "Garrett, how's work this year?" I answered with a forced smile. "Still good, Dad. Really busy during the holidays." He nodded casually. "Yeah, delivery driving must be exhausting this time of year." Less than 2 seconds later, He'd already turned back to Preston, his voice perking up. Keep going? What's the next project? I swallowed the bitter feeling in my throat. Maisie squeezed my hand tight. She didn't say anything, but her eyes told me she understood everything. Dinner passed with sky-high stories and forced smiles. When the moment the kids had been waiting for finally arrived, all I could think about was going home and sleeping for hours to make up for my 10-hour shift without a break. Mom stood up with 3 red-wrapped boxes, her voice excited. This year Grandma and Grandpa have special gifts for you kids. The 3 kids rushed over to open their presents. Inside each box was the latest flagship phone, the kind that costs over $1,000 that I'd seen in commercials. Brody and Owen whooped loudly. Maisie hugged Grandma, her voice soft. Thank you so much. I looked at the phone in my daughter's hands, feeling a heavy weight inside, but still smiling at my parents. You're too generous. Dad waved his hand, his voice full of generosity. We want our grandkids to have nice things. These days, if you don't have a good phone, your friends will make fun of you. Right then, I caught Preston's eyes lingering on Maisie. There was something strange in that look. Then he quickly turned away when he realized I was watching. I brushed it off then, thinking Preston was her uncle. What's weird about looking at his niece? Maisie sat next to me, showing off her new phone with sparkling eyes. Dad, isn't it beautiful? I patted her head and replied, it's gorgeous. Remember to take good care of it. That night, on the drive home, Maisie sat in the passenger seat, clutching her phone, and occasionally squealed when she discovered a new feature. Seeing her happy made my heart feel lighter as well. At least my parents still cared about their granddaughter. I had no idea that 2 months later, that very phone would turn my daughter into a completely different person. After Christmas night, that special gift from Grandma and Grandpa changed my daughter quite a bit. But I didn't notice right away. Maisie was at that age where she started having her own world, and I didn't want to interfere too much with her privacy. I just gave her the basic warnings. Don't talk to strangers online. Don't share personal info. Don't send photos to anyone. But maybe I trusted those warnings too much. 2 months later, I began to notice something was amiss. Before, every afternoon when I picked her up from Odell Middle School, Maisie would always run to the car with a bright smile, telling me all kinds of stories on the way home. About how the math teacher gave impossible homework, how Jake got a bad grade in history and looked miserable, how Sophie broke up with her boyfriend and cried through lunch. I didn't fully understand the trivial stuff, but I enjoyed hearing her talk. But after Christmas, Maisie went completely silent. She'd get in the car, put on her headphones, stare out the window, and not say a word. I told myself it was probably just a phase of puberty. Every kid has their difficult phase. But then I noticed other details. Maisie would jump every time her phone buzzed. She constantly looked over her shoulder, as if she were afraid someone was watching. Every night, I could hear her tossing and turning through the thin wall between our bedrooms. Then her homeroom teacher called. She said Maisie was spacing out in class. Her test scores had dropped significantly in just a few weeks. She asked if anything was happening at home. I didn't know what to say. One evening in mid-February, we were sitting in our small kitchen eating instant ramen. I'd just gotten off work, too tired to cook anything decent. Maisie sat across from me, stirring her fork around in the bowl but not taking a single bite. Seeing her like that, I asked, "Aren't you hungry?" Maisie put down her fork, her eyes red. Then she looked up at me, her voice shaking. "Dad, can I talk to you?" I immediately turned off the TV, pulled my chair closer, and took her hand. "Of course. What's wrong?" My daughter took a deep breath, as if gathering all her courage, then whispered, "I think someone's watching me." Hearing that, my heart felt like someone was squeezing it. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Can you tell me more?" Maisie bit her lip, looking down at the table, then explained. "Lately, my phone's been really weird. Every so often, I receive text messages from unfamiliar numbers, asking where I am, what I'm doing, if I'm alone." I asked immediately, "Did you answer them?" She shook her head, her voice shaking more. "No, Dad. I was scared, so I didn't dare. But the scary thing is, even though I didn't answer, the messages that came after still knew where I was." I frowned and pressed. "Knew how?" Maisie hesitated for a moment, then explained, like, "Got home from school early today?" Or, "How was that ice cream place on Bellevue Way yesterday with your friend?" You know what I mean? Someone knows my whole schedule, knows where I go, what I do, even though I never told anyone. I tried to swallow the anger boiling inside me and asked, "Do you know whose numbers they are?" My daughter shook her head. In frustration. "No, Dad. All random numbers, different ones each time." I tried blocking them, but it didn't help. Then Maisie hung her head, her cheeks bright red with shame. She spoke so quietly I had to lean in close. "And there's something else. My phone automatically downloads weird stuff, inappropriate images and videos. I didn't search for them or download them, but they keep appearing in my photo folder." I was so scared I deleted everything. My hands started shaking. I tried to keep my voice gentle. "Maisie, I need to look at your phone. Is that okay?" She nodded and took the phone from her pocket, handing it to me. Her hands were trembling. I took the phone and pulled her into a tight hug. "Listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault. I'm gonna find whoever's doing this." Maisie sobbed on my shoulder. Her crying tore apart the heart of a father. And me. I knew I had to find the truth. I didn't know how painful that truth would be. That night, after Maisie went to sleep, I took her phone to examine it. What I saw was worse than what she told me. Messages from strange numbers sent late at night appeared exactly as Maisie had described. But what disgusted me were the images in the deleted folder. She thought deleting them made them disappear, but I knew how to access the trash. What was in there made my hands shake with rage. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Missing a day's pay wasn't small change, but my daughter mattered more than anything. I called Ray Dawson, my coworker and closest friend at UPS. Ray's a few years older than me, been working at the distribution center for almost 20 years. He was the first person to show me how to organize packages so I wouldn't hurt my back when I started the job. I got straight to the point. "Ray, I need help. Your brother works in cybersecurity, right?" Ray asked back. "Troy?" "Yeah, he works for a cybersecurity company in Seattle." "What's going on?" I briefly told him about Maisie, about the messages, about the images. The other end went quiet for a long time. Then Ray's voice dropped. "Bring the phone to my house this afternoon. I'll call Troy over." That afternoon, I drove to Ray's house in the Factoria area. The small one-story house was situated in a working-class neighborhood, with the garage converted into a workspace that featured several computer monitors. Troy took Maisie's phone, plugged it into his laptop, and started typing. Ray and I sat waiting in the corner of the garage, nobody saying anything. Nearly 2 hours passed. When Troy stepped away from his workstation, his face had gone pale. He pulled up a chair to sit across from me and spoke earnestly. "Garrett, sit down. I got bad news." I swallowed and asked, "How bad?" Troy took a breath, then explained, "I found high-level tracking software on the phone. Not the basic stuff people download free online. This is professional grade. Can record GPS location accurately to within dozens of feet, read every text message, listen to every call, even access the camera and microphone anytime." Hearing that, I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. He continued, his voice heavy. "The person who installed it can turn on the phone's camera without Maisie ever knowing. They can see what she's doing, where she is, and who she's with, even when she's in her own room." I gritted my teeth and asked, "What about those images I saw on the phone?" Troy nodded, his face full of disgust. "Someone was remotely controlling the phone to download them. This is a tactic predators commonly use with minors. They gradually introduce content, get the victim used to seeing things they shouldn't, then push further." After that, I asked urgently, "Do you know who did it?" Troy shook his head. "I can only trace the IP address. However, to identify who that IP address belongs to, you need to obtain a court order from the internet provider through the police. I recommend you report this to the police immediately." Ray patted my shoulder and added, "But before that, you should ask where this phone was bought. If it had the software pre-installed before it got to Maisie, you'll have a lead." Hearing that, I suddenly remembered. This phone was a Christmas gift from my parents. I thanked Troy and Ray, then drove home, my mind spinning. That night, after Maisie went to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the phone. Then I dialed my mom's number, and her answer made me feel like I was falling into an abyss. Mom picked up after the second ring. I tried to keep my voice normal as I asked directly about where the phone came from. My mom went quiet for a moment, then asked why I wanted to know. I decided to tell the truth about the spying software, about the security expert, about what was happening to my daughter. The other end went dead silent. I could hear Mom take a deep breath. Then she spoke much quieter. Dad and I didn't buy it, Garrett. Preston bought all 3 phones for the kids. He's so generous. He wanted to help because he knows your situation isn't exactly comfortable. We just put our names on the gifts. Preston, my brother-in-law, the man my whole family worshipped like a living saint. I felt like someone had thrown ice water in my face. My throat tightened as I tried to ask more, but Mom had already started raising her voice to defend the son-in-law she adored. She said he was kind-hearted, wanted the grandkids to have nice things, and told me not to think such nonsense. Before I could explain further, I heard movement on the other end. Dad had grabbed the phone. His voice thundered like lightning. Garrett, are you planning to falsely accuse Preston? That man's successful and wealthy, and he has helped this family in so many ways. And you? You drive a delivery truck all day. Now you're turning around and biting the hand that feeds you. I tried to explain that this was about Maisie's safety, his own granddaughter, but Dad wouldn't listen. He only heard what he wanted to hear. Dad yelled one last time that I was jealous of Preston, that I was making things up to tear him down, then hung up. The dial tone buzzed steadily in the darkness. I still held the phone to my ear, not sure why I hadn't put it down yet. My parents chose to believe the wealthy son-in-law over their own son. How pathetic. My whole life, I tried to earn their approval, but as soon as some guy who knew how to make money showed up, I became the liar in their eyes. But now I knew Preston was connected to the phone. I sat in the dark for a long time that night. Tears fell because of my own failure. 42 years old, still crying like a kid abandoned by his parents. Pathetic. But I didn't have time to wallow. The next morning, I went to the police station. The Bellevue Police Department is about a 10-minute drive from my apartment. I went there with Maisie's phone in my pocket, Troy's technical report in my hand, and a mess of chaos in my head. The person who met with me was Detective Vega. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once. When I handed her Troy's technical report, she read every page carefully and nodded in agreement. She looked at me, her voice serious but not cold. We take cases involving minor safety very seriously. With this IP address, we can get a court order requiring the internet provider to give us the owner's information. I nodded, hadn't even caught my breath when she asked, "Do you suspect anyone?" I hesitated for a second. Saying Preston's name right then was like lighting a bomb in the middle of my family. But I didn't have any other choice. I told her about the phone's origin. She took notes and instructed me to prepare myself, as the investigation could take several weeks to complete. Several weeks. Sounds short, but living through each day felt like a whole year. I went back to work, tried to keep everything normal for Maisie. Please wake up, drive to work, deliver packages, pick up my daughter, cook dinner, and pretend to smile when she tells me about her day at school. But every night I lay staring at the ceiling, waiting for a call from Detective Vega, not knowing what news I wanted to hear. 2 weeks later, when I just delivered my last package on Northeast 8th Street, my phone buzzed, the police station's number. Detective Vega got straight to the point. "Mr. Webb, we have results. The IP address belongs to a house in Kirkland." She read the address. I didn't need to hear the whole thing to know whose house it was. Even though I'd suspected it before, I still felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My sister's husband. The man who sat at our dinner table every holiday. Detective Vega continued. "We also contacted your parents to verify the phone's origin. They confirmed Preston Cole was the buyer and provider." I asked, my voice dry, what did they say when they found out the results? The other end went quiet for a moment. Then she answered, "At first, they didn't want to believe it, but when we presented the evidence, they couldn't deny it. Your mother cried. I didn't know how I should feel. Vindicated for being cleared? Hurt because my family was destroyed? Or bitter because I needed police involvement before my parents would believe me? Probably all three." Detective Vega stated that the next step was to obtain a warrant to search Preston's house and electronic devices. She advised me to prepare myself, as this case would likely drag on and cause serious divisions within the family. I smiled bitterly to myself. Divisions? My family had been divided for a long time. This just brought it to the surface. Detective Vega was right. What happened next was worse than anything I could have imagined. After Detective Vega's call, I knew I couldn't keep hiding things from Maisie forever. She was old enough to understand, and she deserved to know the truth, even if that truth might change how she saw the world forever. I sat down next to her in our small kitchen and told her everything. When I said Preston's name, Maisie's face went pale as paper. She didn't cry right away. She just sat there, eyes wide, like her brain was trying to process information too overwhelming to handle. Then she curled up, hugged her knees, and began to cry. Not the angry crying of a kid demanding toys, but the crying of someone who'd just been stabbed in the back by someone they trusted. That night, I heard her tossing and turning through the thin wall. The next morning, she asked me with swollen eyes, "Dad, why did Uncle Preston do that to me? Did I do something wrong?" That question tore my heart apart. 14 years old, she was asking herself if she was somehow to blame for being targeted by a predator. This world is so unfair. But if Maisie was hurting, my family went completely insane. When Preston was called in for police questioning, Jenna called me at midnight. She didn't ask if her niece was okay, didn't ask what Maisie needed. She just screamed at me that I'd ruined her life, that I was jealous of her husband, so I made things up. Then she hung up after one cold sentence. "You're not my brother anymore." Blood relatives, it turns out, are only loyal until money and reputation get involved. A few days later, police searched Preston's house. Mom called to tell me, her voice shaking like a leaf, saying they found a lot of stuff on his computer. Dad locked himself in his room all day and wouldn't talk to anyone. Jenna turned around and blamed Mom and Dad for introducing Preston to her. Mom cried over the phone. "Our family's destroyed, honey." I wanted to ask her if the family was destroyed when Mom and Dad chose to believe Preston instead of me, but I swallowed the question. Some things only add more pain when spoken. Jenna went on social media claiming her brother destroyed the family out of jealousy. She didn't mention a word about what the police found. A lot of people we knew believed her, texting to call me an ungrateful piece of trash. The internet's wonderful. Everyone can play judge without knowing the truth. Preston was released on bail, hired an expensive lawyer, and threatened to sue me for defamation. And me? I sold my Honda Civic to pay for a lawyer. From then on, every morning, I took bus 271 to the station to pick up my work truck. 42 years old, riding the bus like a college student, but at least I still had enough money to buy my daughter a decent dinner. Ray and a few co-workers pooled their money to help me. I refused, but Ray looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "You're fighting for your daughter. Take it, don't be proud right now." Maisie started seeing Dr. Simmons for therapy. After a few sessions, she began remembering details she'd overlooked before. She told me Preston used to sit next to her during family gatherings, telling her she looked like her mother, asking if she had a boyfriend yet, and holding her hand longer than usual. She thought her uncle was just being friendly. Hearing her tell me that, I wanted to drive to Preston's house and punch his face in. However, I no longer had a car to drive. One evening on the bus ride home, Maisie suddenly hugged me and cried, "Dad, I'm sorry. Because of me, you had to sell your car, work extra hours, put up with everything." I held my daughter tight amid the curious stares of passengers around us, speaking very slowly. "This isn't your fault. It's never your fault. You're the most important thing to me." Throughout the 6 months of waiting for trial, my family was like a house eaten away from the inside by termites, still standing on the outside, but rotted through long ago. Jenna completely sided with her husband. She hired a separate lawyer for Preston, even sold her diamond ring to pay the fees. My parents stayed silent, maybe from shame, perhaps because they didn't know which side to take, or maybe because they still hoped everything was just a misunderstanding. The criminal trial took place at the King County Courthouse on a September morning. I sat in the gallery, looking at Preston on the other side in his expensive suit. He still maintained that confident look, as if he were attending a board meeting instead of a court. The prosecutor presented the evidence. Police found hundreds of illegal files involving minors on Preston's computer. There was also an electronic diary with detailed entries about Maisie, including her class schedule, pickup times, the ice cream shop she liked to visit, and her friends list. He'd been tracking my daughter for months like a predator stalking prey. But what shocked me most was when the prosecutor displayed a photo folder. Dozens of old pictures of Brooke, my ex-wife, from when she was young, about 15 years ago, before I even knew her. I suddenly understood everything. Preston had liked Brooke before, and Maisie, with her blonde hair and blue eyes, looked more like her mother every day. He'd transferred that sick obsession to my daughter. The evidence was too clear. Preston's lawyer advised him to plead guilty for a reduced sentence. He did. The judge read the sentence. 7 years in prison for charges of stalking a minor, possession of illegal materials, and intentional contact with a child for harmful purposes. Additionally, Preston had to pay a $25,000 fine, forfeit all electronic devices, and was banned from contacting Maisie for 10 years. After serving his sentence, he'd face 5 years of supervision and permanent registration as a sex offender. A few months after the criminal trial, I filed a civil lawsuit seeking compensation on behalf of Maisie. The court ruled Preston had to pay $150,000 for my daughter's therapy costs and emotional damages. That money would cover Maisie's treatment expenses. When the verdict was announced, Jenna burst into tears. She looked at me with hateful eyes, as if I was the one who sent her husband to prison instead of him digging his own grave. Dad sat silent as a statue through the whole trial, eyes on the floor. He'd once been so proud of Preston. Now that pride had turned to shame. After the trial, Mom came up to me, her voice choked. "Son, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. I said terrible things." I looked at the woman standing before me, the one who'd called me jealous, the one who'd chosen to believe the wealthy son-in-law over her own son. I gently removed her hand and said softly, "I need to go pick up Maisie, Mom." Then I walked away, not because I couldn't forgive her, but because I wasn't ready yet. The people I felt sorriest for in all this, besides Maisie, were Brody and Owen. Those little boys had to sit and listen to a whole courtroom discuss their father's crimes. Their phones were also checked, and police found similar tracking software, but no signs that Preston was targeting his own kids. He'd only installed it as camouflage, to make everything look like protecting the family. A few weeks after the trial, Mom called me. This time her voice wasn't shaky with apologies, but had dropped low, as she just witnessed something heartbreaking. She told me the night before Brody had exploded. The 12-year-old stood in the middle of Jenna's living room, his eyes red with rage, screaming at his mother. "Do you know what my friends are saying? They're calling Dad a pervert. I can't go to school because I'm so ashamed. I'm ashamed to be your son." Mom said Jenna just stood there speechless. She could ignore my accusations, could believe her brother was jealous, but she couldn't ignore the pain in her own child's eyes. After that night, Jenna stopped defending Preston online. She called me, not to apologize, but her voice wasn't full of hatred as it had been before. She said, "I'm taking the boys to therapy." That was the closest thing to an admission I got from my sister. And today, it's been a year since that Christmas. Another Christmas has passed, but it's no longer the same. My sister, after everything, couldn't stay. Because of the boys. Because of the neighbors' whispered stares. Because the name Preston Cole now meant disgrace. Jenna sold everything she could and took Brody and Owen to live in Arizona. Before leaving, she sent me a long text, apologizing for everything that happened, about her blindness, about how money and status had clouded her judgment, about how she'd treated me when I was trying to protect my daughter. I read that message 3 times. Then I replied with one short sentence. "I forgive you. Take good care of the boys." Brody and Owen, before following their mom away, came to see Maisie. The 3 kids sat in the living room of my small apartment, talking for a long time. I don't know what they said to each other, but when they left, both Brody and Owen hugged Maisie really tight. They'll probably carry this wound for the rest of their lives. I hope all 3 will grow up understanding that their parents' sins aren't their sins. My parents, after the trial, aren't the same either. They no longer ask me those casual social questions with polite tones. They come to our place more often, bringing food, sitting with Maisie, asking her about school. Maybe that's their way of making amends after everything that happened. This Christmas, it was just the 2 of us in our small apartment. I cooked the turkey, and Maisie made the mashed potatoes. We ate dinner at the 4-person table with only 2 chairs pulled out. Simple, but warm in our own way. The next morning, A gift was delivered from my parents, along with a handwritten letter. They'd sold their property in suburban Seattle, set up a trust fund for Maisie, and given me Dad's car. In the letter, they wrote that they hadn't been able to guide us through the difficult times, and this was their way of making amends. They're no longer waiting or saving up for anything. They travel, enjoy their old age the way they want to. Perhaps, in the end, they realize that money doesn't mean anything if you can't protect the people you love. As for me, I still go to work regularly, still deliver packages every day, still take my medication regularly, and still pick up Maisie after school. I bought her a new phone, a more secure kind, and taught her how to protect herself online. That's all a regular dad like me can do. She's 15 this year, still beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes, just like her mother. Still a little cautious when she hears similar stories on the news, but she's grown up stronger and knows Dad will always be there for her. After everything that has happened, I try harder every day, raising her to become a woman who knows how to love herself and never lets anyone cross her boundaries. And that's also the lesson I want to share with you. Believe your kids when they say something's wrong. Protect them even if you have to sacrifice everything. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't on the street, but sitting right in your living room. That's the end of my story. Before closing, I would like to ask you, did I do wrong to prioritize my daughter's well-being over maintaining family peace? What would you do if you were in my situation? Please feel free to leave a comment below for me. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and share it so that more people can learn how to protect children. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you next time. When I was unconscious in a military hospital overseas, my biological father sold my house. That house was bought with my late wife's life insurance money. After selling my house, my dad abandoned my 8-year-old son to an alcoholic. Then he used that money to travel to the Caribbean with his new wife. I used to think my father was a hero, until I found out who he really was. After everything my son had to endure because of his grandpa's selfishness, karma came calling in a way no one could have expected. Before I delve into the details of this story, I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. Hello everyone. I'm Brennan, 34 years old. My story happened over a year ago, because of the absolute trust one placed in my family, people I always thought would never betray each other, being blood relatives. Turns out, I was wrong. I'm a Navy logistics sergeant stationed at a base in Corpus Christi, Texas. My job isn't as glamorous as in the movies, mainly making sure supplies and equipment get to the right place at the right time. But it puts food on the table for my kid and me, and gives me enough time to be with my boy. For me, that was enough. Billy was 8 that year, but the little guy had lost his mom when he was just 5. My wife, Sadie, was an elementary school teacher at the local public school. She was the type of person everyone loved, always smiling, incredibly patient with kids. But COVID changed everything. Sadie got sick in early 2021, and even though she recovered, her lungs never fully healed. More than a year later, doctors found late-stage lung cancer. Sadie fought for 6 months before she passed, leaving my son and me with a hole that nothing could fill. But before she left, my wife did something that still brings tears to my eyes whenever I think about it. In those final months, when her hands were shaking from chemo, Sadie still managed to hand-sew a teddy bear for Billy. Took her almost 2 months to finish, and honestly, that bear was hideous. Uneven stitching, stuffing a bit lopsided. But to Billy, it was a treasure. The kid hugged that bear every night, named it Mama Bear, and whispered to it before bed, just as he would to Sadie. When I got deployment orders to a support base in the Gulf, the hardest decision was who to leave Billy with. I chose Margot, Sadie's mom. She lived alone in the Houston suburbs, about 3 hours' drive from us. Billy loved her because every Sunday morning she'd make bear-shaped pancakes, just like his mom used to. To my son, Grandma was his connection to Sadie. The financial stuff was more complicated. My lawyer advised me to grant power of attorney to a blood relative, as it would simplify the legal process if something were to happen to me overseas. Margot wasn't blood family on my side, so I chose my biological father, Wallace Cole. He was a former Marine who served for 20 years in the military. I grew up admiring him, believing that someone who'd served his country would never do anything shameful. Looking back now, that was the biggest mistake of my life. The night before I left, I sat by Billy's bed, watching him clutch Mama Bear tight. When I leaned down to kiss his forehead, the kid suddenly opened his eyes, looked straight at me, and said in that voice of an 8-year-old trying to sound grown up, "I'll be strong, Dad. Promise." The next morning, I kissed Billy's forehead one last time and promised I'd come home safe. The kid stood next to Margot, waving that teddy bear clutched tight to his chest. That was the last image I saw before boarding the plane. I had no idea that just 5 weeks later, while I was lying unconscious in a military hospital on the other side of the ocean, my son's life would turn into hell. I can still remember exactly how it felt that day. I opened my eyes and didn't know where I was. White ceiling, machines beeping steadily, the smell of disinfectant hitting my nose. A nurse stood by my bed looking at me. Then she said in English with a thick German accent, "You're awake. You've been here for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. I'd lost 5 weeks of my life lying motionless in this hospital bed. What happened was at the logistics base, nothing heroic or glorious about it. A supply truck lost its brakes while unloading, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The result was my right leg broken in 3 places and a traumatic brain injury. They had to airlift me to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, the place that handles wounded troops from war zones. I'd been in a coma this whole time. First thing I did when I was alert enough was ask the nurse to borrow a phone. I needed to see Billy's face. I needed to hear my boy's voice. 5 weeks not knowing how my son was doing, that pain was 100 times worse than my broken leg. When the screen lit up, Margot's face appeared, and my heart just dropped. She'd lost at least 10 pounds, eyes puffy like she'd been crying for days straight. I immediately asked, "Mom, where's Billy? Let me talk to the kid." Margot was silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke, voice shaking. "Billy's not here, son." My chest felt like it was closing up. I pressed, "What do you mean he's not there? Where is he? What happened?" And then Margot told me. Every word is like a knife cutting into my chest. Turns out the military had notified my father about the accident, since he had my power of attorney. Just 3 days after getting the news, Wallace showed up at Margot's house with power of attorney papers in hand and an SUV parked outside. He'd come to pick up Billy. Margot paused, voice choking as she continued. She said Wallace had said straight to my boy's face, right in front of her, "Your dad might be dead. You'd better get used to having nobody." Hearing that, I gripped the hospital bed rail so tight my knuckles went white. I don't know what to call what he did. Evil, heartless, or just completely devoid of humanity. Margot continued, her voice breaking with tears. Billy was screaming, clinging to her leg, yelling, "I don't want to go. Grandma, save me." But she couldn't do anything. Wallace had legal papers, and she was just the grandmother. The law wasn't on her side. She'd sold her wedding ring, the one Billy's grandpa had given her 50 years ago, to hire a lawyer. But she still lost. The law sided with the person who had the power of attorney and a blood relation. Stress from the lawsuit gave her a heart attack, and she had to spend 3 days in the hospital. While she was hospitalized, she had no idea what was happening to her grandson. Then she revealed something that made me think I'd misheard. "Wallace sold your house, Brennan. The house Sadie left behind. He got $62,000 for it, then used that money to go on a Caribbean vacation with his new wife. 3 weeks straight." I just lay there, mouth open, couldn't say a word. I'd bought that house with Sadie's life insurance money, plus the savings we'd accumulated over nearly 10 years together. It was her dream, her final request before she closed her eyes. Keep this house for Billy, so he always has a place to call home. And my father had sold it all to serve his own needs. I tried to keep my voice calm, even though inside I was ready to explode. "What about Billy? Where is he now?" Margot broke into sobs, choking out with Spencer. "Brennan, I tried my best." Spencer, my brother, the guy I knew had been battling alcoholism for 5 years now. Wallace had left his 8-year-old grandson with someone drowning in booze. In a foreign country, phone in hand, listening to Margot cry from the other side of the screen. In my head, there was only one image. Billy, 8 years old, clutching the teddy bear his mom made, being dragged away from his grandmother's arms while screaming for help. I didn't know how my son was living. I only knew one thing. I had to get home. Right now. Right after the call with my mother-in-law, I tried calling my father, but nobody picked up, just voicemail. I called local police in Texas, explained the situation, and asked them to check Spencer's apartment. But things weren't as simple as I thought. Police needed to verify the reporter's identity, determine my relationship with the child, and obtain documents proving guardianship. All the stuff I didn't have while lying in a military hospital on the other side of the ocean. They promised to send someone to check, but couldn't say when. Administrative procedures, they said, administrative procedures while my son was with an alcoholic. I didn't have time for procedures. I needed to get home now. The doctor said I needed 2 more weeks to recover. I looked him straight in the eye and told him, "My son needs me right now." He sighed, shook his head, and then gave me the discharge papers at my personal request. I signed without reading a word. 14 hours on the plane, with my casted leg throbbing constantly, with ice-cold crutches propped by my seat, and thousands of questions spinning in my head. I couldn't sleep even though my body was exhausted. Every time I closed my eyes, memories kept flooding back. I remembered when I was 10, Dad took me to the empty lot behind our house to teach me to shoot for the first time. The gun was heavy in a kid's hands, barrel shaking unsteadily. Dad stood behind me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said in that deep, warm voice, "Hold steady, son. A man needs to know how to protect his family." I squeezed the trigger and missed by a mile. But Dad didn't scold me, just smiled and adjusted my stance. "It's okay. Failure is how we learn. What matters is not giving up." That day, I decided that when I grew up, I'd become a soldier like my dad. Then I remembered graduation day from boot camp when I was 22. Dad sat in the audience, wearing an old suit but pressed flat, back straight as a ruler. The moment I stepped up to receive my rank, Dad stood up and raised his hand in a proper military salute. A former Marine saluting a new Navy sailor. Father saluting son. I cried right there on stage. Not because I was proud of myself, but because for the first time in my life I saw Dad proud of me. After the ceremony, Dad put his hand on my shoulder, eyes glistening. "Today, you became a man. I'm proud of you." And I remembered the day Sadie passed. Dad drove 4 hours from Austin to the hospital, stood by my wife's bed in those final moments. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder, as he always did when I needed strength. The moment Sadie took her last breath, Dad hugged me for the first time in decades. He whispered in my ear, "I'm here, son. I'm here." I opened my eyes, the plane still tearing through the night over the Atlantic. Outside the window was just endless darkness and cold stars, but inside me, it burned like fire. The plane landed at Houston Airport at 6 in the morning, sky still dim with mist. I hobbled out the gate on crutches, didn't call anyone, didn't give notice, just caught a cab and gave the address of Spencer's apartment in the suburbs. 1 more hour and I'd see my son, and I was scared of what I was about to witness. Even after more than 12 years of training and serving in the Navy, and despite witnessing numerous accidents and losses at the base, I always told myself I had to remain strong. Soldiers don't cry. Soldiers have to stand firm. But when you become a father, that tough shell doesn't mean anything anymore. How could I ever forget the image of my little son that day? Until I die, I'll never be able to forget. I pounded on Spencer's apartment door at 7 in the morning. The banging echoed through the empty hallway. No one answered. I kept pounding harder, more frantically. 1 minute, 2 minutes, then the door opened. Spencer stood there with bloodshot eyes, greasy hair, and breath reeking of alcohol even though it was early morning. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost, and took a few seconds to recognize me. Then he stammered in a voice still drowsy and drunk. "Brennan, you're alive?" I didn't bother answering. My eyes swept the apartment, and my stomach wanted to turn inside out. Bottles scattered everywhere, beer cans piled on the table, moldy pizza boxes thrown on the floor. The stench made me want to vomit. This was where my father had sent his 8-year-old grandson to live. I asked, voice cold as steel, "Where's Billy?" Spencer pointed toward the corner of the room, a careless gesture, as if he were pointing out where to put objects. not a child. I looked in that direction and saw the closet door cracked open, with darkness inside. My heart was pounding as I hobbled over on crutches. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I pushed the closet door open, and the world collapsed before my eyes. Billy sat huddled in the corner of the dark, cramped closet, knees drawn to his chest, arms clutching the worn, tattered teddy bear. The kid was so skinny that his shoulder blades stuck out clearly under a loose, baggy shirt, a shirt I recognized as Spencer's because it was way too big for my son's tiny frame. His brown hair, once thick and smooth, now had patchy bald spots, with a fresh red scar on his forehead that had just healed. But the scariest part was his eyes. Eyes that used to sparkle like his mom's were now empty, emotionless, like they died from the inside. My son looked up, no reaction, no joy, just asked in a hoarse voice like he hadn't talked to anyone in a long time, "Are you real, Dad? Or am I dreaming again?" I dropped my crutch, slowly sat down on the closet floor, even though my casted leg throbbed with pain. I tried to keep my voice really calm. "I'm real, Billy. I'm here now." Billy reached out his little hand, touched my face, felt my cheek, my nose, my chin, like he was checking if I was real or just an illusion in a dream. Then the kid said something that shattered my heart into a million pieces. "Dad, I'm sorry. I wasn't strong like I promised. I got too scared. Grandpa said you were dead. I thought you left me forever, as Mom did." I pulled my son into my arms and cried. For the first time since the day Sadie closed her eyes, I cried as I'd never been allowed to cry before. The kid felt so light in my arms, so light that I could feel every rib through his thin shirt. While holding my son, my eyes accidentally caught sight of scribbled pencil writing on the wall inside the closet. Misspelled words, written by the shaky hand of an 8-year-old. Day 1, Dad. Where are you? Day 5, I miss Dad. Day 12. Uncle drinks all the time, I'm scared. Day 20, head hurts so bad. And the last line, at the lowest corner of the wall, written in shakier handwriting than all the others. I want to see Mom. My throat tightened as I asked very gently, "You wrote these?" Billy nodded, whispering, "I was scared I'd forget to wait for you to come home." I took out my phone and photographed everything, every line, every pencil mark on the wall. Then I reached for my crutch, struggled to stand up, and carried Billy out of that dark closet. The kid clung to my neck, arms wrapped around like he was afraid I'd disappear, whispering in my ear, "Don't leave again, Dad. Please don't leave again." Spencer still stood there, face pale and couldn't say a word. I set Billy down on the sofa, told him to sit still for a moment, then turned to face my brother. I looked straight into his eyes and asked in a voice cold as ice, "Do you know how long Billy's been in that closet?" He couldn't answer. He couldn't even look me in the eye. The rage erupted uncontrollably. I used my crutch to push hard into Spencer's chest, sending him stumbling backward into the pile of broken bottles on the floor. I stood there, looking down at my brother lying among the wreckage of his own life, and said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "Mom died early because she was heartbroken over you. You know that? She passed away still worrying that you had no one to take care of you. Turns out she was right to worry. You don't deserve anyone's care." Spencer lay there, not getting up, not defending himself. Maybe he knew there were no words that could justify what had happened. I turned back to pick up Billy, the kid still clutching his teddy bear tight. I walked out of the apartment without looking back. The kid felt so light that tears threatened to spill again. On the way back to Margot's house, Billy didn't say anything, just held on to me tight. Every so often, he'd look up like making sure I was still there, still real. But my work wasn't done. There was one more person I needed to see, and this time I wasn't sure I could control myself. Around 9 a.m., we returned to Margot's house. She was already waiting on the porch. The moment she saw her grandson, Margot burst into tears. She ran over, hugged the kid tight, repeating like a mantra, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Billy hugged her back, still didn't say anything, but for the first time since I'd found my son, the kid cried. Not screaming, but silent tears streaming down his cheeks. I sat down on the porch steps next to my son with my throbbing leg, spoke real slow, "I need to go see Grandpa, but I promise I'll come back. Promise." Billy looked at me, eyes still wet, then asked a question that felt like someone was squeezing my heart. Are you mad at me, Dad? Because I wasn't strong? I pulled my son into my arms, hugged him tight, and answered, I'm never mad at you. You're the bravest kid I know. Listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. After Billy went inside with Margot, I called Texas Child Protective Services. The person on duty documented the case and scheduled a worker to come around 3 in the afternoon to take statements and check Billy's health. I provided all the information, including Spencer's apartment address. While waiting, I had another task to attend to. I took a cab to my father's house in the Austin suburbs, a 2.5-hour drive away. Throughout the entire trip, I stared out the window with my mind blank. I didn't know what to say when I saw him. I just knew I needed to look straight into the eyes of the man who'd given me life and ask why. When the cab stopped in front of the house, the first thing I saw was a new SUV parked in the garage. My father used to drive a 10-year-old pickup truck. I hobbled into the yard on crutches, and through the living room window, I saw Caribbean souvenirs still scattered everywhere. He hadn't even bothered cleaning up his spoils from the trip. I pushed the door open without knocking. Linda, my father's new wife, was sitting on the sofa, admiring a designer handbag with the price tag still on. When she saw me, her face went pale. Without saying a word, she quickly grabbed the bag and stood up, scurried straight to the bedroom, and slammed the door. At least she had the decency to feel ashamed. Wallace was sitting in his recliner, feet up on the table, beer in hand, eyes glued to the TV screen. When he heard the noise, he looked up, face showing a flicker of surprise, then quickly returning to calm, and asked me, Brennan, you're back. Why didn't you call ahead? Why didn't I call ahead? Like I was stopping by after a typical business trip. I stood there, hands gripping my crutches tight, looked straight at his face, and asked, you sold my house. After hearing that, Wallace set his beer down, sighed like he was having to explain something obvious to a kid who didn't get it, then answered, the military doctors said you had serious injuries, might not make it. I had to make a decision. Who knew if you'd wake up or not? I let out a bitter laugh, then asked again, you used $62,000 on a Caribbean vacation. At the same time, your grandson was living in hell with an alcoholic. That was your decision? Wallace shrugged, face showing no remorse, then answered coolly. The kid was with his uncle. Blood is family. What's wrong with that? I took out my phone, opened the photo album, then shoved it right in his face and said, read it. Read what your grandson wrote when he was abandoned. Wallace glanced at the screen for a few seconds, then threw the phone back to me and said coldly, kids like to dramatize everything. A few weeks somewhere else and they act like it's the end of the world. My blood was boiling. I growled each word. An 8-year-old wrote that he wants to see his dead mother. You understand what that means? And you're saying he's being dramatic? The moment he deliberately ignored everything I was saying, that was when I had nothing left to negotiate. I opened the notes on my phone and read aloud, fraudulent property seizure, abuse of fiduciary duty, complicity in child neglect. These are the charges I'm filing against you. My lawyer will contact you this week. Then I looked straight into his eyes and continued, and that's not all. The land that Grandma and Grandpa left to Spencer and me 10 years ago, $180,000. You said you invested it on our behalf. Where's that money? For the first time, Wallace's face went pale. He jumped up and yelled, you're going to destroy this family. What do you want? You want me in prison? I looked at the man in front of me, and I didn't recognize him anymore. I said slowly, word by word, you destroyed this family a long time ago. My father died a long time ago. You're just a man who happens to share DNA with me. I turned and walked out. He called after me, yelling something about me being ungrateful, about what he'd sacrificed. I didn't listen. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had no idea that a week later, everything would change in a way no one could have expected, and the person who changed it wasn't me. After leaving the house where I grew up, I didn't hesitate. Right there in the taxi, I called Marcus, an old friend from high school who's now a lawyer in Houston. I gave him the brief version of everything, then emailed all the evidence. Photos of the writing in the closet, messages from Margot, and the house sale documents I'd requested from the bank. Marcus called me back 2 hours later with a serious tone. Brennan, the lawsuit will be filed next Monday. Your dad and Spencer will face charges of fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, and complicity in child neglect. That same day, the Child Protective Services worker came to Margot's house as scheduled. They talked privately with Billy for almost an hour, then examined the kid's physical condition. Preliminary conclusion: mild malnutrition, signs of self-harm, and severe psychological trauma. They opened an investigation file on Spencer for child neglect and recommended I get Billy to a psychologist as soon as possible. For the whole week after that, I stayed at Margot's house, took Billy for checkups at Texas Children's Hospital, and went to the military hospital myself to get my casted leg re-examined. The doctor chewed me out for discharging early and moving around too much, but I didn't care. Every time I saw my son flinch at the sound of loud noises, I reminded myself that I had to be stronger. Because my leg wasn't healed, I hired a psychologist to come to the house to work with my son. But everything changed on Saturday night. My phone rang close to midnight. Not a hospital number. It was Spencer's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. Spencer's voice was shaking from the other end, stammering incoherently. "Brennan, I messed up. I didn't mean to." My heart tightened as I asked, "What did you do? What happened?" Spencer was crying as he told me. Turns out, when he got the notice from the lawyer that he was listed as an accomplice in the child neglect lawsuit, Spencer finally learned the truth. Dad had sold my house for $62,000, went on a 3-week Caribbean vacation with his new wife, and only gave Spencer $2,000 to watch his grandson. $2,000. That was the price to turn my brother into a criminal. That evening, Spencer went to Dad's house demanding an explanation. He wanted to know why he'd been used, why he'd been turned into a pawn in the older man's chess game. But the person who answered the door was Linda. And she didn't just open the door, she opened her mouth to curse. Spencer recounted every word, voice choking. Linda stood defiantly on the doorstep and spat vicious words in his face. "You're a drug addict? $2,000 was generous. Your dad and I have been supporting you for years, spending a great deal of money on you, and now you're making demands? Your mom died early because of you. Now you want to kill your dad too?" Hearing this, I understood what happened next. Spencer lost control. He lunged at Linda, and my father, Wallace, ran out from inside to intervene. In the struggle, he got shoved and fell, his head hitting the corner of the marble table in the living room. Through that phone call, I really understood how terrible my family had become. Just because of money, they are tearing each other apart like vultures fighting over rotten meat. When I got to the hospital, Wallace was lying in intensive care. The doctor said he'd survived but had severe brain trauma. When he woke up after 2 days, Wallace had lost nearly 20 years of memory. He didn't remember me, didn't remember Billy, didn't remember selling the house or the Caribbean trip. I stood by his bed, and he looked at me with empty eyes and asked in a confused voice, "Who are you?" I stood there, looking at the man who used to be my father, and felt nothing at all, just a strange emptiness. The person I wanted to seek justice from had disappeared, leaving only an empty shell that remembered nothing. After that day, Spencer was arrested for assault causing serious bodily harm. The court granted him bail because this was his first offense and there were mitigating circumstances. As for me, Marcus advised I should continue with the civil lawsuit. Even though Wallace had lost his memory, his assets could still be seized for compensation. The court appointed a guardian to manage Wallace's property, and after 3 months of trial, his house was sold to repay part of the damages. The new SUV, the designer items purchased during the trip, and everything else were liquidated. Linda disappeared as soon as she learned all the assets would be lost. She never bothered to visit Wallace once in the hospital. Just the type of person who only loves money, not people. Wallace was put in a nursing home, living on government assistance with no one by his side. The next 3 months, I focused entirely on Billy. The kid was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. At first, he wouldn't sleep alone. He had to lie next to me every night, still clutching that teddy bear tight. A month later, Billy started talking more, asking about Mom, about Margot. 2 months later, for the first time, I heard my son laugh when Margot made bear-shaped pancakes on Sunday morning. That's when I finally dared to breathe easy, because at least my son was gradually coming back. And me? I don't know how I felt. I'd won the lawsuit, recovered part of the assets, but the person I wanted to confront had disappeared. All that was left was an older man sitting in a nursing home, staring out the window all day without remembering who he was. And so, life after the trauma continued. And today, more than a year has passed since the day I found my son in that dark closet. The lives of my father and son have changed in a positive direction. Billy and I are living in a small apartment in the Houston suburbs, just 15 minutes drive from Margot's house. The apartment isn't big, but it's cozy enough for father and son. I used part of the compensation money from the lawsuit to buy back the wedding ring that Margot had sold to hire a lawyer to save Billy. When I gave the ring back to her, she cried for 10 straight minutes. That was her treasure, and I couldn't let her lose it because of my family. My leg has completely healed, and it only aches a little when the weather gets cold. I've transferred to work at a base near my home, so I won't have to go on distant deployments anymore. Billy needs me here. As for Spencer, he's in a court-mandated addiction program. The brothers don't stay in touch with each other. I'm unsure whether I should forgive him or not. Maybe someday, but not now. Billy is 9 years old now. The kid still sees a psychologist every 2 weeks, still occasionally has nightmares, but he's very different from before. His brown hair has grown back thick, and the scar on his forehead is just a faint line. And most importantly, the kid has learned to smile again. A week ago, I got a call from the nursing home. Wallace had escaped. I don't understand how someone who'd lost 20 years of memory could do that. Maybe he got lost, maybe his mind had problems, I don't know. Finally, I found him sitting huddled in front of the gate of the old house in Austin, the place that held all my childhood memories. But that house didn't belong to him anymore. It had been sold to compensate me. Wallace sat there, staring at the strange house with vacant eyes, unable to understand why he was there. The moment my son saw his grandpa after more than a year, the look in the kid's eyes was something I'll never forget. Not fear, not anger, just a deep sadness, like the kid was looking at a stranger he'd once known in a past life. After calling the nursing home to arrange for them to pick him up, I drove Billy to visit Margot as initially planned. On the way, the kid was silent for a long time, then suddenly asked me, "Dad, Mom used to say anger is like holding a burning coal. You plan to throw it at someone else, but your hand gets burned first. Are you still mad at Grandpa?" I was silent for a moment, then answered my son, "I don't choose to forgive Billy, I choose to forget. Because some things can't be fixed by simply saying, forgive. And Grandpa needs to pay for what he did. Until the end of his life." The kid nodded, like he understood something beyond his 9 years. That day when we got to Margot's house, Billy's teddy bear had a loose thread on the belly. I got out my needle and thread to patch it for my son. When I gently pulled out the stuffing to sew, my finger touched something cold and hard. A small silver chain, hidden deep inside. I pulled it out and my heart caught. The pendant was heart-shaped, engraved with 3 words. "Mom loves you." I remembered that, before Sadie passed, she told Billy there would be a special gift that would find him at just the right moment when he needed it most. Maybe this was what she meant. For all these years, the necklace lay quietly in the teddy bear, waiting for this moment. Billy put the necklace around his neck, his eyes glistening, but his lips were smiling. The kid said to me, "Mom's still here, Dad. She's always here." I hugged my son and realized that even though life had taken so much from father and son, it had also left us precious things. Billy is still here, can still laugh, can still love, and every day, he wears his mother's message around his neck, like a reminder that love never truly disappears. That's the end of my story. Before closing, I want to ask you, if it were you, would you forgive? Or are there things that don't deserve forgiveness? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If the story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and enable the notification bell so you don't miss future stories. Thank you for listening. See you again.